Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So let's talk about this new form DS5540, which is the new form they're using to assess the likelihood of an applicant becoming a public charge if granted immigrant access to the USA. So the new form, I've created a video that goes step by step how to complete the new form. I'll give the link of that below. I'm also going to link below some information about how the consular officers are being told to use this new form. And what I want to do in this video is draw out the factors that will be considered from the new form so that you can understand how the decision will be made to decide on your case, if you're going for interview, exactly how that decision will be made, whether you are considered to be at risk of becoming a public charge or not. Okay, so let's just talk about that here. Okay, so just from a point of view of an overview, the DS5540 has been introduced from February 24th, 2020. It's part of a new rule that is being applied through presidential proclamation by President Trump. Nobody's quite thrilled with it. It was blocked for some time, and after going through the court process, it was allowed to continue. There may be other legal charges to it, but for the time being, it is the rule that's being applied. There's another aspect to it, which is regard to healthcare insurance, immigrants showing that they have healthcare insurance. That rule, as of the time of this video being recorded, which is the 1st of March, that rule is still blocked by the courts. But you'll see in the form actually there's some information which relates to that rule, and to one extent or another it's still going to be a consideration. So this form is actually going to cover that aspect of the data as well. Okay, so I mentioned the form is immediately being used. I've already had people who've mentioned their case. They were asked for a DS5540. If you attend an interview without that new form and the consular officer wants to have that new form filled out, they will put your case on AP, administrative processing, while you provide that form and the information on it. So by being educated about the form, you can save yourself some time of AP time after the interview by going to the interview with this form already filled out. So the intent of the form, as I mentioned here, is to assess the case for public charge concerns. Public charge means will you become dependent on public assistance or public benefit programs, and all immigrant cases for very many years, not just under Trump, not just under this new rule, but all immigrant cases need to satisfy a standard that they will not become dependent on public assistance programs. And the latest rule has expanded the definition of what is considered public assistance, but nevertheless the underlying rule has always been there. So this is simply an expansion in a way that the rule is being applied, and it's an existing law, an existing rule, which is how Trump has managed to do this, right? Because he is not able to enact new laws all by himself. He needs to go through the Congress for that. But what he can do is he can say how existing laws are administered, and that's what this particular change is about. The CO, or the consular officer, is expected to assess the totality of circumstances. That's all the circumstances with regard to your case, right? So this form is a way that they can collect that information in a uniform, normalized way between case to case to case. So instead of it being an informal process which depends on how the CO feels on the day, this is a formalized way of collecting the information and then hopefully of assessing the information. The form will be used in addition to existing measures such as the affidavit of support forms. That's the I-864 for most cases, not V. Excuse me there, that's a typo. And I-134 for DV lottery cases. So DV lottery cases can only use the I-134, and other cases which are sponsored by either family members or employers can only use the I-864. So please be clear about those two forms, the distinction between those two forms. But both forms are considered to be an affidavit of support. They're a support of a sponsor, a financial sponsor, who is agreeing to take responsibility for you in the case that you need it. And the process is a process of assessing some factors within the form which are considered either positive or negative factors, right? And some of the factors will be weighted heavily, meaning those weighted heavily factors are of more importance than the other factors. So I don't know if they're using a point system to score this, but you might, for example, let's say a positive factor was 1 point positive for you, but a heavily weighted factor might be 3 points for you. So the heavily weighted factors outweigh the other factors which are not heavily weighted. So that's just an explanation of what that means. So let's talk about the factors that will be considered and assessed from your form. These are the main factors being assessed from the form: age, health, your own health that we're talking about there, health insurance, your income, assets and resources, public benefits, your education and skills, and the affidavit of support. They will also consider liabilities, but it's not been made clear in the rules whether those are positive or negative factors. They're clearly, obviously, negative factors, but there isn't a definition around that in the rules as written at the moment. So I'm not going to go heavily into the liabilities one, but suffice it to say that if you have debts in your home country, you should be looking to clear those debts as you leave the country if you're coming to the USA. It's whether you call that good karma, whether you call that responsible money management, or whatever that might be. You should be looking to clear up your liabilities, right? Any debts you have. Okay, so the first one, the standard of whether the applicant, the standard that they're going to apply is whether the applicant's age will affect his or her employability or may increase the potential for healthcare related costs. In other words, if you're of young working age, 18 to 61, you're of working age, that's a positive factor. And it would be a negative factor if you're over 61. So this is clearly angled against people that are close to retirement. That kind of makes sense because if you're coming here as an older immigrant, either through family circumstances or, let's say, DV lottery, if you're coming here as an older person, you're going to find it difficult and expensive to get health insurance here. You won't have contributed enough years to get the health insurance over here through the state, and so you're at risk more than a younger person would be. So that one, all of these actually are sort of understandable. They're logical, to an extent, you can understand how this has been written. But anyway, that's the first one. So firstly, between 18 and 61, that's a positive factor. Your health. The test is whether the condition, so you will go for a medical interview, and if during that medical interview the physician realizes you've got some sort of medical condition, between the physician and the consular office, they're going to assess whether that condition is likely to require extensive medical care or institutionalization, or will interfere with the applicant's ability to provide and care for him or herself, to attend school or work upon admission, right? So that's pretty clear. If you have some sort of medical condition, that could be considered a negative factor in with regard to this form. And if that health condition um, is uh, is there, and also you're unable to show that you have health insurance, medical insurance, or that you're unlikely to be able to afford medical and health insurance, then that could become a heavily weighted negative factor, right? So this is not about whether you have, a minor limp or, a finger missing or, tattoos or, let's say poor eyesight. But if you're blind, for example, as opposed to having poor eyesight, if you're blind, then you'll have to have, you'll have to, that you'll have to realize that the CO could say, well, that could impact your ability to provide, for him or herself. Um, it could affect your ability to work, etc. Now, obviously, some people cope better with certain conditions than others, and so this is something that a physician will assess. The same thing goes for any sort of medical condition. If you have, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go in and list all the conditions, but if you have something that is going to affect your ability to make a living or attend school, etc., those things could be considered either a negative factor or a heavily weighted negative factor if you've got the condition and do not have medical insurance to pay for that. Okay. Health insurance, while we're on that subject. So the form asks for existing health insurance policies, which for a new immigrant that's not lived here before is either rare or very unlikely. But also, the form asks if the person has a plan to get insurance within 30 days of entry. I've demonstrated and shown in another video how you can show that you've made plans about getting health insurance. I suggest you do that. I suggest you do what I've shown in the other video. Get at least a quote for insurance. I'm not suggesting you pay for insurance before coming to the USA. I personally think that's daft. I would not recommend that to people. But if somebody already had an existing health insurance policy, that would be useful for their application. And in fact, the rules say that that's a heavily weighted positive factor if somebody already has the health insurance. If you don't have health insurance, there is no reverse negative factor for not having that. But that could change in the future, depending on court ruling. So currently, there's no negative factor for that. But we'll wait and see how that plays out. Okay, income. So this is an interesting one. Clearly, immigrants are leaving their jobs that they have in their home countries and they're coming to the USA. So there are aspects of this overall form that are assessing your ability to get work, etc., in the USA. But this particular rating, excuse me, this particular rating is about continuing or expected income. So in other words, if you rent out properties, let's say, if you have some sort of income stream from the country you're leaving, and if that income is greater than 125% of federal poverty guidelines, then that would be a positive factor. And in the same way that if you have a genuine job offer already in hand from the USA, so you're coming to the States, and that job offer is going to be greater than 125% of FPG, that would also be a positive factor, right? So it's either a job that you've already negotiated for and you're ready for, etc., which is unlikely in a lot of cases, like DV lottery cases. It's unlikely you'll have that sort of job offer. But if you did have one, if you had some way of getting interviewed for a job, etc., in the USA, and you had a genuine job offer, that would be a positive factor. But also, you can discuss income you receive from rent, stock, pensions, etc., that you are going to continue to receive even once you're in the USA. Okay. The same measurement, and including a sponsor, will be a heavily weighted positive factor if the income is greater than 250% of federal poverty guidelines. This is an interesting one because this is essentially saying that if you, let's say, for example, you expect to come here on a very well-paid job, right, which is 250% of FPG. And that might be simply a matter of geography. For example, if you come to the USA, in many parts of the country, a well-paying job might be 30, 40K a year, 50K a year. In California, incomes of less, where I live, for example, jobs less than $100,000 a year are considered very low paid in a sense, right? At least in the line that I work with. It's not at all unusual to see people with incomes of 150, 200K, 250K, etc. That's not unusual in the type of work, technology work that I do in the area that I work in, which is Silicon Valley, which is a very expensive place to live. But if you have a job that was like that, for example, if you have a job to come to that's like that, that would be a very heavily weighted positive factor. Even though, in a sense, let's say you're earning 150K in Silicon Valley, you may not feel very wealthy in that, at that sort of level of income. But it's much higher than the federal poverty guidelines because, of course, the guidelines go across all of America. So that's an interesting aspect. So it means that if your job offer that you're going to get, or that you have already, or your sponsor is very well paid, compared to the federal poverty guidelines, which are just across all of America, this could become a very heavily weighted positive factor for you. So that's kind of important to note there. In reverse of that, on income, it's a negative factor if the applicant has income of less than 125%, or if you have a job offer, excuse me, if you have a job offer, but that job is going to be very low paid. That would be a negative aspect, and it becomes heavily weighted negative factor if the applicant has no recent job history, no current job, for example, no recent job history, and has very low prospects of future employment. So if you have no skills, and let's say you've been out of school, maybe you're a youngish person, but you've graduated from school, but that was 2 and 3 years ago, and since then you've never worked, or you've only done very casual jobs. That will be a heavily weighted negative factor, because if you've got no track record that says you've been able to find well-paid employment, why are you going to suddenly change when you come to the USA? So, people need to be realistic about this one. This could be extremely, heavily weighing against a case of someone in that position. Okay, assets and resources. This is additional assets and resources that you can show. This is like savings and semi-liquid assets. Semi-liquid means assets such as a property that you can sell, let's say within a 12-month period, but not immediately, right? So savings is cash. You can access that immediately. That's very valuable. But semi-liquid assets could be considered as well. But it's important to note that your savings and your assets will only be considered at 1/5 of their value. So let's say you had $100,000 worth of assets through cash and equity in a property. That's the value of the property less the value of the mortgage, right? That's what equity is. Let's say you had 100K. That will only add up to $20,000 worth of assessment as far as this test goes, right? So that's a brutal sort of cut on savings, which is why when I tell people about filling in the I-134 for sponsors, it's mostly about income. It's not about the assets they have, because the assets are always going to be considered at only 1/5 of their true value. Okay, so showing assets would be a positive factor. There's going to be more scrutiny on bank statements. They've laid out some of the rules. They're talking about 12 months of history for bank statements, and they may require signed bank letters showing a date the account was opened and deposits and withdrawals within the last year, etc. So it's no longer going to be easy to just borrow $10,000 from someone or $15,000, put it in your bank account just before the interview, and hey presto, you think you're going to pass on that. No, it's not. It's not. That's not going to work. It probably never has worked, frankly. Um, but there needs to be, if you're going to show savings, there needs to have been a track record of that savings being in your account over some period of time, and they're gonna have more scrutiny on those bank statements, right? Um, Okay, public benefits. Now, public assistance. So I've detailed in another video which are the 8 public assistance programs that are now considered to be public assistance or public charge, liable. Um, uh, and the current rule is that use of those 8 public assistance programs prior to February 24th, 2020 will not be considered, which means that unless you're complete nutcase, you're not going to go into the USA now and use those public assistance programs, because if you do, they're going to be sort of counting as a clock um, towards your case, and they will accumulate if you get 12 months use of public assistance programs within a 36-month period. Then that will be evidence that you are at risk of public charge. So if, for example, you're on a temporary visa in the USA now, and you're on those public assistance programs, you need to find a way to get off of those public assistance programs as soon as possible, because every month that goes past, you're accruing time on those public assistance programs, right? So if you have been using those prior to February 24th, 2020, that won't be considered. Um, but nevertheless, you need to get off of those programs. Now, if you've never been to the USA, which is the case for many of the people who win the TV lottery, this just isn't a factor. You will have not have used those public assistance in the past. Obviously, if you've not been living in the States previously, and so this won't be a factor for you. So, and you certainly won't accrue that time after February 24th, because you now know the rules, and the rules are changing. And as I say, it's clear that the landscape, the immigration landscape, is moving more towards people coming here being more self-sufficient and not depending on public benefits. So please make a plan to have a decent income over here and have a good plan for surviving over here, rather than turning to those public assistance programs. Okay, so it's a heavily weighted negative factor, meaning if you've used these public assistance programs before, you're likely to do so again, and so that's unlikely to affect many applicants at this time, because it's so new, and because the date is only from February 24th. But be aware, please be aware, and make plans accordingly for when you do come to the USA, either on temporary visas or indeed as a green card holder, because there is a possible impact of this use towards your citizenship. Um, there isn't a direct link. In other words, they're not supposed to consider public assistance programs, but they may consider your character being, not as strong if you have effectively lied to the government by saying you're not going to use these public assistance programs, coming here as a green card holder, and using those public assistance programs immediately. Um, they will assess your character as being poor, and that is one of the factors for citizenship. And so, therefore, there is a risk to cases if people go and use public assistance. There is a risk to cases even once people have been granted the green card, for when they come to apply for citizenship later on. Okay. Okay, the next one is education and skills. The rules talk about the general principle that the officer must consider both positive and negative factors associated with whether the applicant has adequate education and skills to either obtain or maintain employment with an income sufficient to avoid becoming a public charge. So this one is taking into account your existing education or your existing skills to see whether you're likely to get good employment in the USA. This could be a positive or a negative factor. So, in other words, if you got good education or good skills, you're likely to get a good job. Let's say you're a plumber in your home country or something, which is a good job to have in the USA, well-paid job, right? And it's a skilled job, right? So let's say you're a plumber in your home country, you're coming here, you may not have the best education, but you've got a really good skill, you're likely to become more self-sufficient than if you had no skill at all. In the same way, your education could show that you're more likely to find work of a certain type. Let's say you're in IT, right? A lot of good, well-paid IT jobs in the USA at the moment. So if you've got those sort of background and skills, then you're more likely to be employable in the USA with a good job. On the other hand, if your job history is not good and you've only done unskilled labor and your education level is poor, then that's likely to become a negative factor against you. Okay, so this one is going to be, I think, fairly important for a lot of people because although you can't show the income you had from the old country as meeting the public charge criteria, you can show that you earned a good income abroad because you had a good job, you had a skilled job abroad, and therefore you're more likely to be able to come and get good work when you come over here. Okay. Next one is the affidavit of support. I talked about this earlier. This is an I-864 for most immigrant cases. For DV lottery, it's I-134. At this point, I've been talking about the I-134 for years, advising people to get it. And I still get people who say, well, I don't see that listed. Why do I have to have that? I'm fed up of arguing at that point with people. It's part of immigration law that you've got to meet the public charge standards. The I-134 is the safest way to show that you won't meet public charge risk. It has been for years. It is used in DV lottery cases. Just go and get it, right? If speak to somebody that you know who lives in the USA and get that form filled out. If you're being sponsored for a family-sponsored immigrant case, then clearly I-864 you have no choice. That's a requirement for those cases. It's not a sort of an optional thing. So you're going to have that. But a properly filled affidavit of support with a suitable income, etc., is a positive factor towards approval in the DS5540. So the assessment process, that's basically all the factors that they're going to consider. Once the consular officer has all those factors, they're going to weigh them up. Maybe you'll have 2 or 3 negative factors. Maybe you'll have 4 or 5 positive factors. In that case, they would say it's more likely than not that you would not become a public charge. If, on the other hand, that they're going to say that it's more likely than not that you will become public charge, then the CO actually can refuse your case over this, and there is now a standard refusal here, which is the INA 212A4 refusal. Now, I've mentioned that this form is giving a formalized approach to the assessment process. Well, that's kind of good because it's going to standardize things with it, from one CO to another. But the decision is still solely the decision of the CO and the embassy. And so they can show they should not now refuse a case under 212A4 if they haven't asked for the 5540. and if they haven't received it, etc., they shouldn't do that. But if they've received that form and they've assessed all the factors and they've decided that someone is likely to become a public charge, they can now, they can document why they've decided that and refuse the case in that way. So it's going to save you time if you attend the interview with the DS5540 pre-filled. I created a video that shows step by step on how you answer the questions in that form. It's a fairly lengthy form. It's going to take in a couple of hours to fill out. For sure, it's a hassle. But if you go to your interview with that already filled, it's likely to save you some time, because the other option is that the CEO asks you to fill in the DS5540 after your interview, and which means that your case will be on AP, which is 212G. You'll be on AP until you provide that form and until they've assessed it. So that could take weeks, and you could be on AP on all of that time, and during that time, you could miss out on the visa. If you're in a DV lottery case, for example, it's possible that you would miss out on your visa if you delay too long. So it just makes sense to take this form as well as an I-134 to a DV lottery interview, for example, and probably in other cases as well. I've got these links here, but I'll put them in the description below. This is the source of the information that I've used for coming up with this video, which is the instructions given to consular officers. This is how they are told to assess the forms. I've given a link to the form itself so that you can download it and fill it in either in ink, or you can fill it in online. But you still need to download it, and you need to present it to the consular officer at time of interview. And I've created another video which shows how you fill out the DS5540 step by step. So both of these videos are fairly long. I appreciate that. I understand that they're long videos, but we're talking about immigration to the USA here. If you've got no patience for a long video, then frankly, you probably are not going to make it in the USA anyway. Because if you don't take it seriously, then, well, you're not going to have a good chance. So hopefully this information has been useful to you. Please let me know. Let me know your comments below. Give me a like on the video as well. That helps the algorithm somehow. And do subscribe to my channel to make sure you're getting all the latest information from me. And pop over to my blog as well. Again, I'll link to the blog in the description below. Pop over to my blog, where if you're a DV lottery candidate, there's hundreds of articles that I've written over the last few years, which will help you in your process. All right. Okay. That's all I've got for now. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye-bye.